When a person begins to look closely at the origins of their suffering, they often find that the majority of their troubles do not come from the world itself, but from the way their mind interprets the world. Most people are defeated not by events, but by their own reactions, crushed not by circumstances, but by the meaning they attach to those circumstances. This is why one must understand that the path to solving most problems is not a matter of gathering more information, more wealth, more support, or more luck, but of gaining clarity over one's own internal movements. 5 lessons, consistently practiced, reshape the way one perceives hardship and turn a distressed mind into a disciplined one. These lessons are not intellectual exercises, they must be lived. They demand attention, self-honesty, and repetition. For a person's character is forged not by a single moment of insight, but by returning again and again to the principles that guide right action. The first lesson is the recognition that your power lies only within what you can control. Many torment themselves by attempting to change what is beyond their influence. The behavior of others, the opinions held about them, the outcomes of events, the timing of opportunities, or the unfolding of life's unpredictable currents. A person attempts to wrestle with what is outside their grasp, and then wonders why they remain exhausted. The mind that directs its energy toward the uncontrollable becomes a prisoner to frustration. But the moment one understands that only their judgments, choices, efforts, and responses belong to them, they begin to reclaim the strength they once abandoned. It is not that the world suddenly becomes easier. It is that the person stops scattering their force. When your attention is anchored to the sphere of your influence, your problems shrink into manageable tasks instead of becoming overwhelming storms. The task each day becomes simple: improve your judgment, purify your intentions, and shape your character. When you do this, external events lose their ability to disturb you the way they once did. The second lesson is to cultivate a mind that interprets events without unnecessary emotion. Most suffering is the result of layering stories upon reality. Something happens, and the mind instantly adds fear, exaggeration, insult, catastrophe, and false meaning. Humans are storytellers by instinct, but this instinct often betrays them. A simple event becomes unbearable because the mind twists it into something more dramatic than it is. If a person receives criticism, they imagine they are under attack. If a plan fails, they imagine they are failures. If someone leaves their life, they imagine they are unworthy of being loved. The world deals only the event, the mind assigns the pain. Learning to pause before judging, to see events as they are rather than as the mind fears them to be, dissolves suffering before it grows teeth. It is not indifference. It is clarity. It is not coldness. It is mastery. The world becomes far less threatening when one ceases to add imaginary weights to it. The third lesson is to strengthen the relationship you have with discomfort. People run from discomfort as though it were poison, but in truth discomfort is the furnace that shapes resilience, patience, discipline, and wisdom. Every meaningful achievement demands the endurance of some form of discomfort. Whether it is the discomfort of patience, the discomfort of effort, the discomfort of self-restraint, or the discomfort of honest self-reflection. When one avoids discomfort, problems grow larger because the mind weakens. But when one willingly embraces discomfort, the mind becomes capable of bearing more than it once believed possible. The person who trains themselves to withstand challenges is less troubled by life's surprises. Setbacks become lessons rather than threats, and difficulties become teachers rather than enemies. One learns that strength is not developed in comfort, but through meeting adversity with a steady mind. By shifting your relationship with discomfort, you solve problems not by escaping them, but by becoming stronger than them. The fourth lesson is to discipline your desires. Much of human dissatisfaction comes from wanting things that are either unnecessary or harmful. The mind that is controlled by its desires is always restless, always comparing, always chasing. It imagines happiness somewhere in the future, tied to external achievements or possessions. And in this chase, it creates more problems than it solves. An undisciplined desire leads a person to debt, addiction, distraction, anxiety, and insecurity. But when desires are moderated, freedom emerges. The disciplined person does not chase everything that sparkles. They choose what aligns with their virtue and purpose. They no longer feel compelled to prove themselves to others, for they know that self-worth is not measured by what they accumulate. They no longer live in fear of loss, for they desire less and value what they already have. When desires are governed by reason rather than impulse, a person becomes less easily manipulated, less easily disappointed, and less easily thrown off course. Most problems evaporate when a person wants less but appreciates more. The fifth lesson is to practice acceptance, not passive resignation, but the active acceptance of reality as it is. Many problems arise not from the situation itself, but from a refusal to accept that the situation has already happened. People fight the past with anger, fight the present with resistance, and fight the future with fear. This internal battle drains them of peace. Acceptance does not mean liking everything that happens. It means understanding that resisting reality only multiplies suffering. Once you accept what is, your mind becomes free to focus on what can be done next. Acceptance turns energy outward, towards solution, growth, and adaptation. Without acceptance, all energy is wasted in denial, complaint, and resentment. When you accept the nature of people, you stop expecting unrealistic behavior from them. When you accept that life includes unpredictability, you stop demanding perfect control. When you accept that time moves forward, you stop clinging to what cannot return. Acceptance brings clarity, and clarity brings power. These 5 lessons, when lived consistently, dismantle many of the problems that weigh heavily on the mind. The reason they solve so much is not because they change the world outside you, but because they change the world inside you. The greatest suffering is internal, and the most profound solutions are internal as well. When a person understands the boundaries of their control, they stop wasting energy. When they stop adding unnecessary emotion to events, they stop creating imaginary suffering. When they embrace discomfort, they grow stronger than the challenges ahead. When they discipline their desires, they free themselves from the chains of excess and comparison. When they practice acceptance, they dissolve inner resistance and redirect their power toward meaningful action. But these lessons must be practiced in moments both great and small. They cannot remain abstract ideas. They must guide how you respond when someone insults you, how you act when plans fall apart, how you think when fear rises, how you choose when desires pull you off your path, and how you behave when life disappoints your expectations. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to exercise these lessons. Problems are not removed from your path, so you may live softly. Problems remain so that you may practice the principles that strengthen your character. A person does not develop mastery by reading virtue, but by living it in the face of difficulty. Every day offers chances to refine your inner world. When something frustrates you, the first lesson invites you to separate what is yours from what is not. when something scares you. The second lesson encourages you to strip the event of exaggeration. When something hurts you, the third lesson reminds you that discomfort is not your enemy. When temptation pulls you, the fourth lesson invites you to choose reason over impulse. And when something does not go your way, the fifth lesson offers the freedom that comes from acceptance. These lessons do not promise a life without pain, but they promise a life without unnecessary suffering. They do not promise control over events, but control over your response to them. They do not promise admiration from others, but self-respect. They do not promise perfection, but progress. Solving problems is often less about changing circumstances and more about changing habits of thought. With enough discipline and practice, the mind becomes a place of order rather than chaos, strength rather than fragility, and wisdom rather than confusion. To live by these lessons is to build a life that cannot be easily shaken. You remain steady during conflict, patient during hardship, humble during success, disciplined during temptation, and peaceful during uncertainty. Life continues to unfold with all its unpredictability, but you no longer feel enslaved by it. You become a stable force amid changing conditions. You solve problems not by wishing the world were different, but by cultivating a mind capable of meeting the world as it is. And in doing so, you discover a freedom that cannot be taken by circumstance, a clarity that cannot be clouded by opinion, and a strength that cannot be broken by misfortune. When you begin to observe the patterns of human frustration, you will notice a powerful truth. Most people are not suffering because life is unkind, but because their minds have never been trained to interpret life correctly. A person who has never learned to manage their expectations will always feel betrayed. A person who has never learned to govern their desires will always feel deprived. A person who has never learned to confront discomfort will always feel attacked. And a person who has never learned to control their own thoughts will always feel controlled by the external world. It is not fate that makes life unbearable. It is the lack of inner discipline. The lessons that shape a strong mind are simple, but their simplicity does not make them easy. They must be repeated, tested, and refined through real experience. Consider how often people create their own suffering by expecting the world to behave according to their wishes. They expect others to treat them fairly, and when they don't, they feel wounded. They expect plans to unfold perfectly, and when obstacles appear, they feel cursed. They expect success to come quickly, and when it doesn't, they feel discouraged. They expect relationships to last forever, and when endings come, they feel betrayed. All of these expectations are built on illusions. The world is not obligated to fulfill your preferences. People act according to their character, not your hopes. Events unfold according to causes and conditions far beyond your control. Trying to bend life to your expectations is like demanding the sea to remain calm, because you wish for smooth sailing. The sea does not bend to your will. You must learn to navigate it with skill and courage. This is why one must learn early that peace does not come from controlling life, but from mastering perception. If someone speaks harshly to you, the words only have power if you grant them meaning. If a situation blocks your path, the difficulty only becomes a burden if you interpret it as punishment rather than opportunity. If an inconvenience arises, it only becomes suffering if you declare that it should not have happened. The world moves through cycles of calm and chaos. It does not consult your preferences before changing, but the mind that is trained in discipline knows that events are neutral until interpreted. It learns to detach emotion from facts, to see with clarity rather than panic. A calm mind can solve problems that a chaotic mind only multiplies. Much of the strength you seek is built through the conscious acceptance of discomfort. People try to build a meaningful life while avoiding every form of challenge, not realizing that the discipline required to solve their problems is born from facing those very challenges. When you train the body, it grows stronger through resistance. When you train the mind, it grows stronger through adversity. No one becomes patient without irritation, courageous without fear, or wise without mistakes. Your problems are not signs of failure, they are exercises placed before you so that the mind may grow in stature. When you avoid discomfort, your capacity shrinks. When you turn toward discomfort, your capacity expands. Soon life stops overwhelming you, because you become someone whom life can no longer easily shake. A person trapped by desire is like a person trying to fill a bottomless bucket. They seek validation from others, not realizing that external praise cannot fill an internal void. They chase possessions, not realizing that the more they gain, the more they fear losing. They chase admiration, not realizing that the opinions of others change with the wind. They chase pleasure, not realizing that indulgence weakens discipline. They chase distractions, not realizing that each escape makes them more dependent on escape. When desires rule the mind, the person becomes a servant to impulses that never rest. But when one learns to discipline desire, the heart becomes still. You begin to realize that much of what you once wanted was unnecessary. You begin to appreciate what already exists in your life. You begin to see that the deepest form of wealth is the ability to remain unshaken by loss, because you have stopped expecting external things to complete you. Acceptance is perhaps the most misunderstood form of strength. Many people equate acceptance with weakness, as though it means surrendering to misfortune. In truth, acceptance is the foundation of all power. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot improve what you deny. You cannot respond effectively to what you have not mentally embraced. Acceptance clears the fog from the mind so you can see the next step. Without acceptance, a person lives in emotional resistance, complaining, blaming, clinging, rejecting, wishing, resenting. These reactions drain energy and cloud judgment. Once you accept that life is unpredictable, that people are imperfect, that you will face loss, and that change is constant, you free yourself from unnecessary emotional battles. From acceptance comes clarity, and from clarity comes right action. Most problems do not require extraordinary intelligence to solve. They require steadiness. They require removing the layers of emotion, expectation, and desire that distort judgment. A problem that appears overwhelming becomes simple when the mind becomes simple. Complexity emerges when you add fear, impatience, anger, comparison, or ego to the situation. A clear mind sees the situation plainly and responds with reason. A chaotic mind sees the situation through an emotional storm and reacts impulsively. Many of the world's problems are magnified not by the events themselves, but by the mind's lack of discipline in interpreting them. A person who embodies these lessons becomes someone who approaches life not with desperation but with dignity. When an insult comes, they respond with understanding instead of hurt. When misfortune arrives, they respond with composure instead of panic. When plans fail, they focus on the next step instead of drowning in disappointment. When desires arise, they choose principle over impulse. When reality shifts unexpectedly, they adjust instead of resisting. They become a lighthouse in storms, unmoved not because the storms are gentle, but because their foundation is strong. People often search for solutions outside themselves, hoping that a change in environment, relationships, finances, or circumstances will fix their problems. But problems follow them because their source is internal. You cannot outrun your thoughts. You cannot escape your undisciplined reactions. You cannot hide from your unexamined desires. You cannot avoid the consequences of resisting reality. Sustaining peace requires internal transformation. It requires courage to confront the mind's habits. It requires honesty to admit where you have been weak. It requires discipline to replace old patterns with new ones. Yet once these lessons are integrated into daily life, you begin to experience a form of freedom that external changes could never provide. When a person realizes that control is limited, they stop wasting energy. When they learn to perceive events without exaggeration, they stop creating unnecessary pain. When they embrace discomfort, they grow capable of weathering storms. When they discipline desire, they no longer feel enslaved by craving. When they accept reality, their mind becomes aligned with truth instead of fighting against it. A life shaped by these principles becomes a life of clarity, strength, and inner stillness. You must remember that transformation does not happen in a single moment. It happens through repetition. Each day tests your discipline. Each interaction tests your patience. Each setback tests your ability to perceive clearly. Each desire tests your self-control. Each change tests your acceptance. You refine your character by meeting these tests with intention instead of instinct. The world gives you endless opportunities to practice. Every conversation, every challenge, every inconvenience becomes a classroom for the soul. As you continue to internalize these lessons, you will notice that the same problems that once caused you stress no longer disturb you. Things that once triggered anger now provoke reflection. Situations that once overwhelmed you now seem manageable. Desires that once controlled you now lose their power. Realities that once felt unfair now feel natural. You discover that the solution to most of your problems was never out there. It was always the strengthening of the inner world. People spend their lives searching for peace externally, unaware that peace is the result of discipline, perception, and acceptance. Once the inner world becomes orderly, the outer world loses its ability to create chaos within. As you move through the world with these lessons alive in your mind, you begin to witness the profound difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is instinctual, immediate, and emotional. It requires no thought, no discipline, no awareness. Anyone can react. Even animals react. But responding requires mastery of oneself. It requires the ability to pause, to breathe, to examine, to choose. In this pause lies the power that separates strength from weakness. Most problems escalate because people react without thinking. A harsh word leads to an argument. A disappointment leads to self-pity. A challenge leads to panic. A desire leads to self-sabotage. But a person who has trained themselves to respond instead of react becomes unshakable. They no longer hand their peace over to every inconvenience or provocation. They decide, with clarity, how they will move. Observing the world, you will find that many individuals live in a constant state of mental noise. They rehearse past mistakes, replay old wounds, anticipate imagined disasters, and argue with themselves about what might go wrong. Their suffering comes not from the present moment, but from the thousand thoughts they attach to it. The present moment, when experienced without mental distortion, is rarely unbearable. It is the mind's constant commentary, its judgments, exaggerations, fears, assumptions, that makes life heavy. But the trained mind learns to silence this noise. It learns to see the present without dragging in the past, and without projecting into the future. Such a mind becomes a place of calm even in chaos. When you learn to quiet the unnecessary noise, you solve dozens of problems without even trying, because the problems existed only in the story the mind created. Another powerful shift happens when you learn to stop taking things personally. Most of the things people do are not about you. They are about their habits, their fears, their insecurities, their upbringing, their impulses, their wounds. Someone's anger does not define your worth. Someone's coldness does not diminish your dignity. Someone's rejection does not shrink your value. When you take everything personally, every interaction becomes a battlefield. But when you understand that others act according to their inner world, and not according to your desire, you free yourself from unnecessary emotional turmoil. You stop expecting the world to revolve around your sensitivities, and you begin to navigate life with a steady mind. This alone dissolves countless conflicts before they begin. In your journey toward mastery, there will be moments when the mind resists change. Old habits will try to pull you back into emotional patterns that once felt familiar. Fear will whisper that discomfort is dangerous. Desire will tempt you toward shortcuts that weaken your character. Ego will demand validation and recognition. Impulse will push you toward immediate gratification. This resistance is part of the process. Strength is not built by eliminating resistance, but by meeting it. Every time you choose discipline over impulse, you reshape your mind. Every time you choose patience over frustration, you strengthen your character. Every time you choose clarity over emotion, you refine your perception. These small choices, repeated, transform you gradually. Growth is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, subtle, almost invisible, until one day you realize you have become someone your past self would admire. You must also learn to measure life, not by what you avoid, but by what you overcome. Many people seek a life without challenge, thinking comfort is the path to peace. But comfort has never built strong minds. A person becomes capable by facing what others avoid. When you avoid difficult conversations, they grow heavier. When you avoid responsibilities, they accumulate. When you avoid truth, it becomes sharper. When you avoid effort, your potential decays. But when you confront difficulty with courage, every challenge becomes a stepping stone. You begin to trust yourself more. Self-trust is built from witnessing your own strength. The more you overcome, the more you realize that you were capable all along. Problems lose their power because you have gained the ability to handle them. Another essential principle is learning not to exaggerate the importance of any single moment. Too often, people convince themselves that one failure defines them, that one rejection destroys their worth, that one setback determines their future. But life is vast, constantly shifting. A single moment is but a small piece of the entire story. What seems catastrophic today may become irrelevant in a month. What feels like loss may later reveal itself as liberation. What appears as a setback may be the beginning of a redirection that leads to growth. When you learn to zoom out, your problems shrink. You begin to see that life has given you countless chances before and will give you countless more. No single event is final. The story continues, and you always have the ability to choose the next chapter. Patience becomes another weapon. Many problems come not from the situation itself, but from impatience. People want immediate results, immediate clarity, immediate healing, immediate success, immediate understanding. They rush the process and then declare themselves defeated when outcomes take longer than expected. But nature teaches us that growth is slow, steady, and deliberate. Trees take years to mature. Rivers carve through stone over centuries. The mind, too, takes time to strengthen. Problems often resolve themselves not through force, but through patience. A calm person waiting with clarity often finds solutions that panic would have obscured. Patience turns chaos into order because it allows space for wisdom to emerge. One must also remember the importance of self-observation. Problems multiply when a person acts without awareness. When you do not see your own patterns, you repeat them. When you do not notice your own triggers, you fall to them. When you do not question your own thoughts, you believe all of them. But when you observe yourself as though you were watching someone else, clarity emerges. You begin to notice moments when emotion rises, when impulse takes over, when assumptions distort perception. This observation creates the distance necessary for transformation. You can only change what you can see. Many people remain trapped for years simply because they never learned to step outside themselves and examine their own minds. As you continue this path, you discover a remarkable truth. You need far less from the world than you once believed. You do not need constant praise to feel valuable. You do not need constant agreement to feel secure. You do not need constant success to feel worthy. You do not need constant comfort to feel safe. You do not need the world to validate your existence. The more you let go of unnecessary needs, the lighter you become. Problems lose their weight because you stop giving them power. You rise above circumstances not by escaping them, but by outgrowing the dependency that made you vulnerable to them. Through this process, you begin to embody a profound internal steadiness. You are no longer thrown off course by the mood of another person. You are no longer shaken by unexpected change. You are no longer controlled by fear of loss. You are no longer manipulated by desire. You are no longer overwhelmed by uncertainty. You move through life with the calm awareness of someone who has built a fortress within their own mind. This is the essence of strength, not appearing untouchable to others, but becoming untouchable within yourself. The world retains its unpredictability, but your mind retains its equilibrium.